Welcome back. We're talking national minimum wage. That's the topic of conversation on this, the latest in the series of New Age Business Briefings brought to you by the SABC, today sponsored by Transnet. And we've just heard from our panel the various challenges that both sides of the equation, if there is such a thing, employers, employees, but also you and me at large, actually, because we're also part of that conversation. How do we navigate what is the right thing to do on the one hand, and making sure that people, A, get lifted out of poverty, have a living wage, but at the same time, don't destroy the businesses that create the jobs as well. We're going to start looking at your tweets, hashtag TNABizBrief at Morning Live SABC, if you have any thoughts, any questions on that. And we also have an audience here that are going to help us with this conversation. Opening thoughts we've had just before the break. Clive has said, as Mr. Dlamini, that we can't afford a minimum wage. So what do? Do we put our hands up and give up?
Well, Clive is an economist. We argue that South Africa indeed can afford a national minimum wage. You remember we all talk about an inclusive economy, and that as a nation we've got to strike a good balance of that. And indeed, people have argued, Treasury has argued that 715 jobs are on the line. Just open the button and say we have a national minimum wage. But the research that this proposal is based on has disputed that. So you would have two views at all the times. I think what is critical here is to begin to appreciate that in order to achieve this inclusive economy, you have to take the first step into that. And the first step has been taken. There's a proposal. This proposal alone, by research, says 47% of the working people at the moment would be impacted by that, which means we have 47% of working people who earn less than 3.5. And 3.5 is not what is the final issue on the table. You must also look into, Mkhwanazi has spoken about the sectoral determinations. What do they cater for? He has spoken also about what you do with the domestic worker who is employed by a public servant who earns 10,000 rands and must then part ways with 3.5 out of that and still be able to keep that employee. The document has spoken to a range of these issues. It has spoken about what do we do with the really struggling SMMEs who we believe as Cosatu, many jobs are still created by the SMEs in South Africa, and how do we sustain that space? Because the conglomerates, the big ones, have stopped employing people. The jobs are coming from these ones. How does the minimum wage help that particular situation? Lastly, the issue of when do we introduce this in South Africa is also going to be key. Our target at Nedlac is that by the end of this year, we should have concluded with these negotiations so that there are no shocks to the employers to prepare for this. Because they must prepare for this. Workers must be prepared for this. The farm worker who has never seen a union must say, how does this one talk to her? Cosatu has a benchmark, and I know that NACTU has their benchmark, but what we have done at Nedlac is that as labor, we've tried to navigate this journey so that we can agree on a particular figure. And the CEC of Cosatu that was sitting last week has said, no, 3,500 falls far too short than what we expect of this process. And I think we're going back to the negotiations with that in mind. We have said 4.5 because we benchmark ourselves also from what we call a minimum living level, which is researched also. It may sound too little, but for the one who really is earning 1,200 a month or 1,800, if you say the minimum living level is 4.3, 4,300, so it means you must begin to say you negotiate for that person from that benchmark. I know it's going to kill her.
Okay.
How do we balance? That's the debate that is happening.
All right. Dr. Baloyi, I'm sitting here and I'm trying to figure all this out as we speak, but we know for a fact SMMEs are the greatest employers.
Yes.
These huge businesses are not going to add too many more jobs anymore.
Yeah.
You've got people coming in and coming out, but by and large, it's the SMMEs. And then we've got this layer of young people that we're busy trying to encourage to become entrepreneurs. He's just starting out. We have levels of business failures at the moment, of businesses failing within the first 2-3 years. This is not going to help them if I'm starting out, I've got a little business, and my first employee, I have to pay huge amounts. How do we navigate? And this, just the SMMEs, and then we'll talk about the other sectors. Before you answer, I'm going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll get an answer for that.
Sure.
Because that sector is probably the most vulnerable in terms of business going forward with this kind of legislation. Stay with us.